On the same night, a new peace plan for Ukraine leaked to the press. The Kremlin acted as if the war was already won. Trump's allies talked about freezing the front lines. Sergei Lavrov hinted that Russia would not rush to any talks, and that Ukraine should simply accept losing its land. But while Moscow was enjoying this feeling of victory, something very different was happening in the dark above Russia. Fast jet-powered drones and home-built cruise missiles were already crossing the border, heading for a secret aviation hub near Rostov and for one of Russia's busiest oil harbors on the Black Sea. In just a few hours, explosions lit up airfields, fuel tanks, and port facilities that the Kremlin once sold to its own people as untouchable. For viewers who follow weapons and politics, the shock is simple. Ukraine is answering a political peace plan with a long-range strike plan of its own. This report on military force will break down what was hit, why these targets matter so much, and how this could change any future deal over the war, so stay with us. Like and share this video, and subscribe so you do not miss the next moves on this map. The leaked peace draft gave Moscow a political gift and left Kyiv facing a hard choice. According to people who saw the document, the proposal would freeze the front lines in place and turn many occupied towns into new facts on the ground. It would ask Ukraine to accept the loss of more territory, cut a large part of its army, and give up long-range strike tools that reach deep inside Russia. In plain language, the state that was invaded would be asked to stand still, while the invader would keep most of what it had already taken. For a country that had spent years rebuilding its forces and designing new missiles, that kind of offer sounded less like peace and more like a controlled surrender dressed up in diplomatic terms. Russian officials spoke as if this draft proved that their strategy had worked. Sergei Lavrov told reporters that Moscow did not feel any pressure to hurry into talks, and that any deal must respect what he called the new realities on the ground. State media echoed this line and showed maps where Russian colors covered wide areas of eastern and southern Ukraine. The message to domestic viewers was simple and proud. Russia had paid a heavy price, but it had forced the West to accept a new border and had pushed Ukraine into a corner. The slopes and jagged walls around the Shakhtarsk complex give exactly that kind of advantage, as they overlook narrow roads and damaged intersections that still link Ukrainian rear areas to the forward edge near Marinka. Commanders knew that if they agreed to reduce manpower and shut down deep strike programs, they would never again be able to hit key oil ports, air bases, and industrial hubs inside Russia. Officials also understood that any promise to stop such attacks would be hard to reverse once it was on paper and endorsed by Washington and European capitals. Public opinion in Ukraine, shaped by years of occupation and missile strikes against cities, made it very hard for any government to sign away land and weapons without first trying every other option. Because of that, the draft did not calm the war. It pushed Kyiv to search for a way to regain leverage before the real negotiations even began. That search ended in a decision to answer a political plan with a military signal and to show that Russian airfields and oil terminals far from the front line could still burn when Ukrainian planners decided to act. The Taganrog strike was built to show that Ukraine could reach the technical heart of Russia's air power, not just the trenches at the front. Planners did not send one drone or one missile. They built a mixed attack package built around fast bars, jet-powered UAVs, homegrown Neptune cruise missiles, and other long-range unmanned aircraft. These platforms approached from different directions and altitudes so that radar crews had to track many threats at once. The goal was to overload defenses around an industrial and military cluster near Taganrog in the Rostov region, where key aviation facilities sit close to each other. When that sky was full of small and large signatures at the same time, many Russian gunners had only seconds to decide which shape on their screens mattered most. That confusion is exactly what made the rest of the plan possible and opened the way toward the Lavrov complex and its airfield. Lavrov Aviation Scientific and Technical Complex is not just another factory on a Russian map. It is a core maintenance brain for long-range aviation. Inside its hangars, technicians overhaul two 95MS strategic bombers, which are the main carriers of Kh-101 cruise missiles launched against Ukrainian cities. The same workshops and test stands support a 50 airborne early warning aircraft, which fly with a radar dish on top and give Russian pilots a wide view of the battlefield. Keeping such fleets in the air needs a steady flow of spare parts, trained engineers, and special tools that cannot be moved overnight to another town. By aiming missiles and drones at this cluster, Ukraine tried to hit not just individual airframes, but the whole support chain that lets bombers and radar planes stay in service year after year. They avoided straight streets and open intersections, choosing instead to cut through damaged interiors and side alleys, which is exactly how trained anti-tank teams try to reach a chosen firing line. From that angle, the choice of Taganrog shows a clear intent to touch the core of Russian long-range aviation, not just its outer layer. The visible damage at Taganrog Yuzhny Air Base gave that intent a very concrete shape. Drone operators tagged each contact on their tablets, and those icons flowed in real time back to the command post, where staff officers watched the pattern build on the digital map. What stood out on that map was not just that Russian teams were present, but that their paths all bent toward the same wrecked landmark, the Shakhtarsa apartment complex. Open-source analysts in Ukraine and abroad pointed out that Beriev had used Il-76 platforms for special projects, and that one such airframe at this site was linked to the A-60 laser test program. From those broken heights, a Kornet or Metis launcher could see into key gaps between buildings and look straight down several short approach lanes that armored vehicles might be forced to use. For a base that was supposed to support some of Russia's most advanced aviation work, seeing those hangars cracked open was a sharp blow to both prestige and capability. That is why the focus soon shifted from simple bomb damage reports to deeper questions about what kind of technology might have been lost in those flames. The A-60 program is central to those questions because it sits at the edge of air and space warfare. Engineers use that aircraft as a flying lab for high-energy laser systems mounted in the rear section of the fuselage. To the officers in the command post, the picture looked less like random infiltration and more like the slow assembly of a structured anti-tank trap aimed at Ukrainian armored relief routes. In theory, such a platform could threaten enemy surveillance aircraft, high-altitude balloons, and even satellite sensors that pass over Russian territory. The project was old, slow, and very secret, but it still represented Moscow's hope of having a tool that could blind Western space assets in a crisis. If the airframe at Taganrog was indeed the A-60, and if its systems were destroyed beyond repair, the loss would set that dream back many years, because rebuilding such a one-off project during a long war is extremely hard. Once you see that level of risk for Russia's air and space ambitions at Taganrog, it becomes easier to understand why Ukraine also chose to hit the country's oil and naval lifelines on the Black Sea in the same wave. While Russian crews were still counting the damage at Taganrog, another arm of the same operation was already moving toward the Black Sea coast. In the same window of time, Ukrainian planners sent long-range drones and cruise missiles against the port of Novorossiysk and the Tuapse refinery. The main focus at Novorossiysk was the Sheskari's oil terminal, where tankers take on crude and fuel for export. Early clips from local residents showed loud blasts over the harbor and flashes that lit up storage tanks and loading arms. Investigators later pointed to hit marks near pumping stations and pipe manifolds that feed the piers, which would be enough to stop loading even if the main tanks survived. For a port that handles millions of tons of oil each year, even a short pause in those flows sends a clear signal about how far the war can now reach. The strike did not hit only fuel equipment, because parts of the naval harbor were exposed as well. Images from the waterfront suggested that at least one pier area used by the Black Sea Fleet had taken damage from blast waves and falling debris. Once in place, they slowed their breathing, relaxed their muscles, and accepted that they might have to hold the same sight picture for hours before a single shot, since an early trigger pull would waste the entire concept. Even when warships are not destroyed outright, shrapnel and fires near the hull can force long repairs and tie up dry dock space that Russia needs for other units. By pushing explosions into a harbor that the Kremlin had treated as a safe rear base, Ukraine underlined that the fleet's support chain is now within reach. That reality turns Novorossiysk from a distant staging point into another frontline node in the struggle over the Black Sea. The choice of targets becomes even clearer when you look at how Russia has used these ports since Crimea came under drone pressure. After repeated hits on Sevastopol, many major ships and support vessels shifted to Novorossiysk to escape Ukrainian missiles and naval drones. This city became a key logistics hub for ammunition, fuel, and supplies feeding units along the southern axis. Cranes, rail links, and storage yards there form part of the backbone that keeps Black Sea operations going even when other bases are under attack. The reason was simple and harsh, since destroying only the lead team would warn the others and leave enough tubes intact to build a fresh ambush somewhere else along the same belt of ruins. Once you understand that role, the logic of pairing this port with the air hub at Taganrog stands out more sharply. Tuops and the Sheskari's terminal add another layer, because they are not only local fuel depots, they are major export gates. Oil from fields deep inside Russia moves by pipeline to these coastal points and then flows out on tankers toward clients such as China and India. Those sales bring in the hard currency that fills the Kremlin's war chest and supports the wider state budget. When a refinery catches fire or a loading terminal has to shut down part of its system for repairs, every day offline cuts into that revenue and reminds foreign buyers that supply from this route is not guaranteed. Insurance costs rise, ship owners ask more questions, and traders start to think about alternative sources, even if the physical damage looks limited on paper. In that sense, a single wave of strikes can echo through both the fuel market and the naval logistics network at the same time. Put together, the hits on Novorossiysk and Tuops show that Ukraine was not only trying to blind and weaken Russian air power at Taganrog, it was also aiming straight at the financial engine and sea bridge that helped sustain the war, which leads directly into the wider campaign against Russia's oil and energy system. Ukraine's strikes on Novorossiysk and Tuops only make full sense when they are placed inside a much larger energy campaign that has been running for months. That impact smashed the optics, tore through the operator's temple, and killed both the man and the missile in one move, because without that sight, the expensive warhead lost any chance of guidance. Each wave has hit different nodes in that network so that repair teams never get a long pause, and planners in Moscow must constantly reshuffle protection. Kyiv now says that this series of blows has taken about 1/5 of Russia's refining capacity temporarily offline. Independent outlets and energy analysts do not all agree on the exact number, yet many of them confirm that a noticeable slice of the system has been forced into stop-start mode. Close by, the second ATGM group tried to swing its launcher toward the flash they thought they had seen, but an FPV drone had already started its attack run from a blind corner in the sky. That sense of strain is what links the burning tanks on the coast to the less visible work going on at airbases and aviation plants. The same pattern of sustained pressure explains why Taganrog and the Beriev complex matter far beyond one dramatic night of explosions. Unlike a single refinery, which can sometimes be bypassed with extra rail routes or ship cargoes, a specialized aviation center is very hard to duplicate. An assault element that had been waiting behind a screen of broken walls now moved forward in short rushes, using hand signals and brief bursts of rifle fire to cover each bound. The facility also handles deep upgrades for two 95MS bombers, which carry the cruise missiles that have hit power grids and city blocks across Ukraine. Inside those dark spaces, short, close-range bursts finished the wounded and anyone still clutching equipment, and each cleared section reduced the chance that a hidden launcher could reappear later in the day. That clearing work mattered because not every missile tube had been set up on a tripod, and one ATGM had already been dragged back toward a pickup truck covered with a tarp on the edge of the complex. From this long-term angle, Taganrog looks less like one target among many, and more like a central gear in the wider machine. At the same time, serious analysts are careful not to claim that Beriev has been wiped off the map. Another FPV was directed onto that target, and it dropped through the loose canvas and detonated just inches from the launcher, turning the truck bed into a burst of fire and twisted fragments. Russian engineers can move some repair work to other plants, improvise new storage spaces, and cannibalize airframes for spares while they patch what can be saved. Industrial hubs built over decades often carry a degree of redundancy that allows them to keep limited output even after a shock. Because of this, the fairest reading is that Russia's long-range aviation support has been weakened and disrupted rather than totally erased. Capacity is likely to fall, schedules will slip, and risk will rise for every bomber and radar aircraft that stays in service. Yet the system will not vanish overnight. Those limits on both sides are exactly what set the stage for the broader strategic and psychological effects that start to appear once the smoke clears and people begin to count what these strikes really changed. These strikes exposed real weaknesses in Russia's shield and shook public confidence inside the country. A small Ukrainian special operations team was already hidden in a patch of burned trees nearby, and they received the updated drone feed on their tablets, which showed icons for every weapon and man in the Russian detachment. For a population that had been told modern air defenses could stop almost anything, seeing flames rising near such batteries was a shock to the system. At the same time, damage to export terminals cut into energy income, while temporary flight limits over parts of southern Russia disrupted civilian travel and business. Local loudspeakers that issued chemical and nuclear alerts, plus official advice to take iodine tablets, spread fear far beyond the blast zones. When industrial zones and elite resort areas both feel threatened, the old story about a safe rear area no longer holds, and that change in mood feeds straight into how any peace deal will be judged at home. From Kiev's point of view, this is not random fire, but a carefully shaped ladder of pressure built to squeeze Russia's war machine and funding streams at the same time. By aiming at aviation hubs, drone plants, and missile support centers, Ukraine tries to limit how many advanced platforms Moscow can keep flying. By also hitting oil terminals and fuel infrastructure, it pushes up repair costs and cuts into the cash that pays for shells, rockets, and salaries. If those two lines of attack continue together, the long-range strike tempo that Russia can afford and sustain will steadily drop, even if factories and ports keep working at a reduced level. That slide matters when diplomats sit down, because leaders in Moscow will know that every month of delay eats into both hard power and budget reserves. In that way, the explosions become bargaining chips, since they turn battlefield pressure into leverage at any future negotiating table. The message that comes out of this wave is aimed both at the Kremlin and at Western capitals watching from a distance. For Russia's leadership, the signal is that no distance inside national borders can be fully trusted when Ukraine can build and launch its own deep strike weapons. For partners in the United States and Europe, the signal is that local industry in Ukraine can produce systems that deliver real strategic damage without needing direct American missiles. That point is important for lawmakers who must defend aid packages and for defense firms considering long-term joint projects with Kiev. If they believe that each dollar invested makes Russia's air fleet weaker and its oil exports less secure, support for Ukraine stays politically easier to sell. Those perceptions will shape how much help flows in, how hard Moscow pushes back, and how both sides judge the balance between keeping the war going and searching for a settlement. These strikes on Taganrog, Novorossiysk, and Tuapse turn one night of explosions into a clear statement that the war can still move deep inside Russia's comfort zone. Burning hangars at an aviation hub, oil tanks in flames on the Black Sea coast, and air raid sirens warning of chemical or nuclear danger all point to the same truth, which is that the defensive wall sold to Russian citizens as solid and modern has real gaps. At the same time, a leaked peace draft backed by Trump's circle is still on the table, and Moscow is trying to look calm and in control in front of its own people and foreign partners. By hitting the tools of long-range air power and the routes that carry oil money out to global markets, Kiev is saying that any future deal will depend not only on signatures, but also on how much punishment Russia's bases, ports, and refineries can still take. So the open question is simple. Does the Kremlin double down and push the fight wider? Or does it move toward talks from a weaker position while these attacks continue to eat away at its strength? If you want more straight talk like this on weapons, battles, and the politics behind them, like this video, share it, and subscribe to Military Force so you do not miss the next report.